Hello, I want to welcome you to the Power of Our Story. On Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will have a weekly storytelling evening where each one of our 29 authors of our book, Wounds to Wisdom, Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives, will read their story from the book. Our collaborative effort is a labor of love from all of us to those protectors who may be suffering in silence. All are welcome. So tonight, I want to introduce you to a Gold Star mom, Holly Higgins. Holly's the mother of Senior Airman Daniel J. Johnson. Holly is a Gold Star mom, keynote speaker, certified story coach, and liaison for the hero's journey, where she serves families of our nation's fallen by unlocking the timeless healing power of storytelling. Holly worked for over 25 years as a registered nurse and social worker in the mental health field. While serving others, she has found healing in her own journey. Holly's son, Senior Airman Daniel J. Johnson, was killed in action in Afghanistan. And it was his tragic, untimely death that taught her that grief is not something to avoid, but rather embrace. In embracing her own pain, she learned that grief is a gift. She believes it helps us to mourn our loved ones. It teaches and guides us as we navigate loss, sadness, and unspeakable tragedy. Daniel's courage, patriotism, and integrity inspire Holly every day to live a life that is worthy of his sacrifice. He is her hero because he loved his country enough to die for it. So, Holly, welcome. This is your night, and we're excited to hear your story.
Thanks, Sarah. This is so hard because I love you so much, and I'm afraid. I spoke those words on my knees in the dirt on a hot August afternoon in 2006. 3 months before that day, my 18-year-old son, Danny, came home from his first year of college, the best year he'd ever had academically. New friends, new adventures, and he knew exactly what he wanted to major in. And yet, he announced he was going to set it all aside for a few years to enlist in the United States Air Force. My heart fell to my feet. I was the youngest child of a World War II combat veteran who came home from war like many of his generation and said, nothing. Nothing about the sights, the sounds, the smells, the horrors and the atrocities that he was exposed to and at times participated in. Nothing. Oh, he dealt with it. He drank and drank. And by the time I was born, more than a decade after that war had ended, my father had become a raging, violent, and dangerous man. He did eventually seek treatment, but not until his addiction cost him everything, including his health. He only lived 2 years in sobriety, but in those 2 years, he discovered the healing power of storytelling through Alcoholics Anonymous. And shortly before he died, he told me one combat story. That one story answered all the questions I had cried myself to sleep with as a child. I decided at 21 years old that the US military was responsible for all the pain and damage that my family had suffered. After my father's flag was folded at his graveside service, I turned my back and I told myself, and I vowed never to have a relationship with that organization again. As my bright and beautiful son, with the world at his feet, told me his plans to enlist, all I heard was his choice to follow in my father's footsteps. That summer, Danny discussed while I cried and prayed that I would find the words to talk him out of it. By summer's end, I still had not found the words. On that hot August afternoon in 2006, I was gardening. Danny quietly came out, kneeled in the dirt beside me, put his hands in the dirt with me, and silently started pulling weeds. Being a mom, I knew I knew something was up. I knew he wanted something, and I knew what it was. He wanted confirmation that I would go to his swearing-in ceremony. He had just been notified that he was part of a group of exceptional recruits being offered the privilege to be sworn in by a general in front of dignitaries at a very special service at the Chicago Air and Water Show. And it was a great honor for him and important to him that I was there. While we continued to pull weeds silently and he waited, I rocked back up on my heels. I looked up at that deep blue sky, and inside I cried out and pleaded for the magic words that would change his mind. And that's when I said, this is so hard because I love you so much and I'm afraid. The moment I spoke those words, I was reminded of what I taught him and his brothers about love and fear. Those words did not change his mind. They changed my heart. Because my love for him is greater than any fear, I told him that I would be at that ceremony. So the following weekend, my husband and I stood on a hot sandy beach in Chicago and watched what was up until that point the most honorable and noble ceremony we had ever witnessed. And afterwards, I told Danny that I was humbled. Several months later, we were at Lackland Air Force Base, where Danny graduated from basic training in the top 10%. He stood so straight and tall in his crisp new uniform, and he talked to me about what integrity meant to him. He was still a teenager, 19 now, but still a teenager. The transformation was so impressive, and I told him I was impressed. Months later, we were at the Naval School Explosive Ordnance Disposal, also known in the military as EOD, bomb squad to us civilians. The EOD is one of the most difficult technical schools in the Department of Defense. Historically, the EOD technical training program has a 75% attrition rate, meaning for every 500 airmen enrolled in the program, 125 will complete it. 51% failed the first phase. Danny sailed through, graduated with honors. I told him at that awe-inspiring ceremony how proud I was to be his mom. When Danny deployed, he knew I was concerned about combat and how that would affect his heart, his mind, and his spirit. So before each deployment, after we'd hug, he'd start walking away, and then he'd turn back and he'd say, "Remember, Mom, I'm going to disarm bombs. I'm going to save lives, not take them. That's good for the spirit." On October 5th, 2010, while deployed in Afghanistan, after a long day of disarming IEDs, improvised explosive devices, the team was ready to call it a day. They had disarmed 6 IEDs that day, and the military told us they estimate an average of 5 lives saved per IED safely disarmed. The bomb dog they were working with appeared confused earlier and continued to return to a specific area, indicating a threat. The equipment wasn't picking anything up. The combat engineer checked several times and found nothing. So they called it a day. Danny's EOD team was attached to the Canadian Army for that mission, and he had befriended several of the Canadian soldiers. One of those soldiers made plans with Danny to meet with his three brothers in northern Minnesota after the war. The Canadians were leaving the next day, so Danny told his teammates that he was going over to say goodbye. As he walked toward the Canadians, Danny passed the area where the dog had indicated something unusual. And that's when my son stepped on the pressure plate. There was only one life lost in that blast. I spent many months in a fog in those early days, and I remember very little. In fact, I have only 3 clear memories from that time. My first memory was when the military told me that Danny's face was untouched. Though his body was so badly injured, it could not sustain his life. He was lucid enough to draw on his EMT training from college and instruct his teammates on how to try to save his life. I had a hard time believing the military. I was haunted by the fact that Danny's casket was closed. I never got to see that beautiful face again. If what they told me was true, then why the closed casket? After my father's experience, how could I trust them? My second memory was walking out of the chapel at Vandenberg Air Force Base following Danny's military funeral. His commanding officer's wife approached me with a message from the medevacs. They wanted Danny's mom to know that as they loaded him on the transport, they told him, "You're going home, son." And he replied immediately, "I know, but please tell my mom that I didn't break my face." Danny took his last breath minutes later. That message caused an about face in my journey with the United States military. Danny's message couldn't possibly have been made up. It was a joke that started the summer he turned 5. We lived on the top of a hill that his 2 older brothers would race down on their 2 wheels. The day we took the training wheels off Danny's bike, I told him, "You aren't ready for the hill. Stay here with me and your little brother until your balance is better." In the split second it took me to turn around and check on his little brother, see him riding in circles in his tricycle, Danny darted down that hill, racing out of control with the front wheel wobbling the whole way down. He wiped out at the bottom in the gravel. I sprinted down there, held him in my lap, and we cried together for what felt like hours. When he had road rash, half of his face. When he finally started crying, trying to catch his breath, and he said, "I'm not even 5 yet, and I already broke my face." From that day on, before every trip away from home, including deployments, I'd always tell him, "Don't break your face." The message from the medevacs was powerful. The military did not lie to me. Danny knew he was dying, and he sent me a message that only he could send. He truly was calm, just as they had reported. And he was peaceful, even to the end, so much so that he never even lost his sense of humor. My third memory is when the fog started lifting and I was able to articulate words that I can now remember. And the first ones I remember was, "I am grateful. So grateful that I supported my son and his journey with the United States military." Those words baffled some. Someone said, if he hadn't been in the military, he wouldn't have been in Afghanistan and he wouldn't have died at 23 years old. Perhaps. However, I am and will forever be grateful that on that hot August afternoon in 2006, I chose to trust love over fear. Had I not, Danny still would have gone to that humbling swearing-in ceremony, but I would have missed it. He still would have graduated from basic training in the top 10% and stood straight and tall in his crisp new uniform and talked about what integrity meant to him. He just wouldn't have been able to talk about it to me. He would have graduated. Oh, and I wouldn't have had this precious memory that I carry in my heart. At the end of that weekend, after we hugged goodbye, he started to glide away. And my husband leaned in and he whispered in my ear, "He left home a boy." Look at that confident man. Danny still would have graduated with honors from the EOD school. I would have missed that awe-inspiring ceremony. And he still would have been deployed to Afghanistan. And he still would have been killed in action on a dusty road 7,000 miles from home. The only difference there is that he would have died, having never heard me tell him how proud I had become of the man he had become. I am forever grateful I chose love over fear. I've accepted the lessons grief has taught me. I've discovered that love is not only greater than fear, it's also greater than death. Through love, gratitude, and telling Danny's story, I have restored a sense of hope, meaning, and purpose, which enables me to enjoy all that remains. All this because of a young man whose heart was so compassionate. He chose a career that enabled him to save the lives of others, and whose heart was so courageous, he saved those lives, disarming bombs at the risk and the ultimate sacrifice of his own life. My hero and my son, Senior Airman Daniel James Johnson.
Holly, that's a hard story, and it was so beautifully shared. I want to thank you so much for your courage, for your love over fear, and the desire to refurbish your scars so that other people can have hope. So, Holly, I'm going to turn off the recording so we can have all these people, we can have a more intimate talk and ask you questions and comments. But again, I just want to thank you. Thanks for being here and being an author.
Thank you for giving me the privilege to share Danny's story.